Hello, everyone. Welcome to the very first episode of the Tris-Tan Podcast. I'm your host, Tristan, and today, for our first guest, we have Tom. Would you like to introduce yourself a bit, Tom?
Yep. Hello. So, as Tristan has said, my name is Tom, and I have the great honor of being the very first guest on the podcast.
Cool. And I'm sure this won't be your only time on the podcast.
I do hope not.
Yeah,
I do hope not.
yeah. I reckon you'll be a recurring guest. But yeah, interested to get into today's topics, which we're actually going to be talking about modern day communication skills, and then we'll also talk about AI. But before we get into that, I do have a few quick, just introduction, get to know you questions lined up that
Okay.
we'll both answer. First one being, are you an early bird or a night owl?
Ooh, that's a good one. It's funny because I always identified myself as an early bird previously because when it came to nighttime, I just get super tired. But then recently I've kind of been finding that I end up studying much later than I used to, just because there's like those extra hours at the end of the day that I can just quickly just do a lecture or just quickly write down some notes. But I still prefer, if I had a choice between either waking up early or staying up early to study, I would prefer to wake up early and study. So I guess at my core, I still see myself as an early bird.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, and I'm night owl all the way through.
Mm,
Mate, my brain isn't active until like after 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, and I can go till late at night. That's just how my brain functions. When it
mm,
comes to getting up early, like I can do it, but I'm still asleep mentally for a while.
yeah.
Um, Second question. What is your favorite season of the year and why?
Ooh, favorite season. I'm assuming that we're going off like the classic four seasons, summer,
Yeah.
autumn. Yeah. Okay. Ooh. I feel like this would vary depending on like what mood I'm in, but I'm gonna say early summer, if that makes sense. So like the heat of summer is just kicking in, but it's not at the point where it's too hot. Like that pre-Christmas, end of the year sort of stage. Like that's my favorite.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. For me, sort of similar to what you were saying in terms of, for me, it's like autumn, preferably
Mm,
early autumn when winter hasn't kicked in, but like
mm,
it's not peak summer of the heat. Um,
mm.
that's why I like both autumn and spring, but the only difference that separates autumn and spring is I like to step on crunchy leaves. So,
Oh yeah,
like, autumn's just nice vibes with, all the leaves around.
yeah. And I like to stick crunchy autumn leaves behind my glasses.
Yeah, that you do. And last question, if you could have one of these superpowers, which one would you have, flight or super speed?
Ooh, that's a good question. Um, oh, that's my chair creaking. It's probably gonna creak like all the time, so we'll get used to that. I've actually thought about this quite a bit before. Um, I've got to say flight, and the reason I say flight is because you've never specified how fast I can be flying, and so I'm going to take the assumption that I can just choose to fly at supersonic speeds if I wanted to, which allows me to have both pretty high speeds and also just be able to like to go. I just like the idea of just like being like it's like levitating in the air and looking at stuff just seems really cool. To be fair, super speed would also have some significant perks, but I've got to go with flight.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I probably should have specified that, but yeah, I don't know. I think I'd prefer super speed. Like flying
Mm.
would be cool, but just being able to just zoom around places faster, and obviously, I don't think people are ready for flying human beings. So,
That's
super speed has
but
the perks.
do you really think that they're ready for super
No,
speed?
the perks of super speeds they can't see you when you move that quickly. So
Okay, I
that's
can
just
see I
the
can see
way
where
I
you're
see
coming.
it.
That's true.
Um,
So you'd be moving fast enough then to not be perceptible to the naked eye.
yeah, something like that.
Right.
Basically, yeah. So
Interesting.
now those are out of the way. We'll move into our first topic, which is modern day communication skills. Um,
Right.
I can just kick it off with
Yeah.
a
Go for it.
simple question. Have people lost basic communication skills in our society?
Have people lost basic communication skills? That's actually a pretty good question, but I'd say it kind of depends because the idea of like a basic form of communication skill is kind of dependent on the specific society that you're a part of.
Mm.
So, to give you some example, like different societies will have different standards of behavior and conduct. Like, I believe in parts of East Asia, it's considered rude to maintain eye contact with someone for a long period of time while conversing. It's seen as a form of disrespect. Whereas in Western cultures, that's seen as just basic good manners and a sign of your inner character. So there is that element to it. But I mean, what would you term as basic communication skills?
Yeah, that's probably a fair point. Should probably look into that. I'd say like just being able to have a interaction or conversation with someone, um, just even whether random person or just someone you met for the first time. Especially when it comes, I'm also thinking more so the sense of in a sort of being able to have debates and opposing ideas in that sort of sense as well.
Right, right.
Like yeah,
So like,
so
so engage. So would you say then, like, when you talk about like basic communication skills, you're referring more to the idea of like being able to engage in issues with which two parties might disagree with?
yeah, sort of like that.
Okay. Well, I mean, I guess I'd kind of throw it back to you by sort of saying, has there really been any point in history where people have ever really engaged in like contentious debates peacefully? Because it seems like if you look at the historical records, there's always been times when people have had arguments that didn't go well. That's like conflicts, wars, disagreements. You could look at numerous examples in the Roman Senate. Even during the Protestant Reformation, there were numerous theological debates between Protestants and Catholics, and there were huge tensions that flamed up as a result of that. So, like, what makes I guess what I'm trying to say is, what because you said have people like lost basic communication skills, which I'd assume you're referring to modern society when you say that.
Yeah, yeah.
So, what is it about modern society that would make you sort of question whether we've lost that basic communication skill?
I'd say it's more so just obviously having opposing views and disagreeing with one another. That's been common throughout all of history, and it always will be because they're going to always have different opinions and views. More so the sense of nowadays when you seem to have a discussion and you disagree with other people, people take it very personally and are
Ah,
offended
right.
by it. And next
Yeah.
thing you know, it's more so an insulting, throwing verbal insults at each other rather than actually
Mm,
having a discussion on topics you disagree with, which it's almost like people see if you disagree with them, it's a sign of disrespect. But
mm,
really, it should be the other way of the fact that we're having the time to taking the time to have these conversations with one another. It's really showing respect. And yeah, you can disagree with people while still showing them respect. Like, yeah,
mm.
just sort of in that sense, I guess. Like, yeah, like, has that changed?
Okay. Well, I mean, in terms of people having disagreements, I would say that, well, learning how to communicate and having how to like interact during disagreements is, well, it doesn't come easy to people. It doesn't come
Yeah.
easy to me. And I guess from 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 the point of view that you've just presented, I did that one possible elements behind that could just be there isn't really a safe space in which we can practice these skills. Um,
Hmm.
I mean, to be fair, there are some like you could join like a debate class in school, but aside from like maybe like a few specific areas, there's not really sort of like easy methods for the average person to sort of learn how to keep their cool during disagreements, how to like stay calm under pressure. Um, and I guess the second thing behind how people might have lost their sort of basic communication skills is there's a very strong trend where we attack like say that someone presents an idea that we don't agree with,
Mm.
right? Instead of combating the idea, we'll attack the person who's presenting the idea.
Yeah.
Um, and this is a common. You see this a lot in politics, where during like election I mean, you've seen like the election ads, like they're pretty funny, but a lot of it's like they'd attack like the overall party or specifically the leader. Like it's like the posters of just like the politician with like the really like weird facial expression, which is just really funny. And it's like, do you want this guy in charge of Australia? No. And it's like they're not really focusing on what he's actually like. They're not like saying it's not like they're saying he's got a policy for economic change, but it won't work for X Y Z, or
Mm.
his ideas for national defense are inefficient and they can't really be funded. They just say no, this guy looks dumb, he's an idiot. So there's definitely like a stronger idea where they'd attack like the person behind the idea as opposed to the idea themselves, I'd say.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I think like a lot of that comes from like, especially in our society, when we disagree, it's very easy to, when you have opposing views to other people, it's very easy to sort of look down on that person or think because they have their values, these values, they're like sort of almost lesser, and to start that sort of, I guess, dehumanizing of the other side in terms of the political
Mm,
sense of things, and just
yeah,
I think that's where it becomes so easy to start throwing those like sort of insults rather than
yeah,
being able to treat each other with kindness and respect. I think that's what
yeah,
is sort of causing these problems, like in the sort of modern um, society of
yeah,
these sort of debating or like just political areas.
yeah. Politics is definitely a an area where it's very easy to get into disagreements, where emotions are often really inflamed.
Yeah.
Um, but I guess you could also put that down to the fact that politics often concerns like the occurrences of the day. Like when
Mm.
you're discussing with someone about the need for better standards of living, but they're not having those problems, they might not be able to recognize the point of view that you're coming from. They might just think, oh, this guy just wants to change the government because he's, I don't know, some left wing progressive idiot or something like that. And then they
Yeah.
just sort of like get, and there's a lot of like associating people with specific labels. It's like especially with the like, and this is a bit of a topical example, and I want to treat this topic with like all respect and delicacy, but the ongoing conflict with Israel and Palestine.
Yeah.
Like I know people who support Palestine who are very vocal about it. I also know people who, while they might not necessarily support Israel, they don't support the people who support Palestine.
Yeah.
Like they'll just refer to them and be like, "Oh, these are just like these left wing people that are just like getting all caught up in this fervor and they're not thinking or using their heads. Like they're just like
Mm.
unnecessarily they're like blaming an entire genocide on an entire state. It's really stupid." But and then that sort of leads them to sort of like frame everybody who's like trying to advocate for Palestine in a negative light instead of sort of contemplating, well, maybe these people are less concerned about the politics behind it and more just concerned about human rights. But again, the level of like how much an individual may be concerned with one or the other is very it's difficult to ascertain even for ourselves. So how much harder is it
Mm.
to do that for somebody else?
Yeah, for sure. I think just even sort of going back to say how you're talking about, like, the sort of the current conflict of Israel and Palestine, just sort of these sort of topics, I think people love to try and just make it out into black and white when
Mm,
there's so many topics like that just have a lot of gray area, where it's
yeah,
just like when we frame it as black and white, it's easy to see the other side as like, how can you not? It's so obvious that this, like, my views are right and your views are wrong, but it's really just that gray area, which is why you do have those like opposing views. And I think, um, yeah, just like even in general, like, of course you're gonna have topics which are more like just that is black and white. I mean, black and white, sorry. Um, like just more clear cut, but um, yeah, I think that's why we just have to keep an open mind and sort of try and see from the other people's perspective, because yeah, there are a lot of things in our world that are controversial, which are really just sort of grey area kind of
Mm,
things.
yeah, yeah, it is. It actually is quite. Um, I do feel a little uncomfortable when there's like when people spend all this time sort of like arguing, oh, this side is right, that side is right, and then I can't help but have a part of me that just thinks, guys, people are dying. That that should be like the bigger problem than getting angry at the people who are against you. It's
Mm.
like maybe we should be focusing more on ourselves about what's actually happening than just setting out to get angry at those who disagree with us. But again, like I don't have like any major stake in the conflict. I'm not Palestinian. I'm not of Jewish descent.
Mm.
Perhaps if I was, I'd see this entire conflict very differently.
Mm.
It's very easy for me from like my isolated position to sort of make these observations.
Mm.
And I guess that's part of what we have to remember is that even though we ourselves might not be involved in this, other people might have very, very different experiences and there might be a lot more at stake for them.
Mm. Yeah, and like I'm just gonna even like bring it to like a few other things like over the past sort of recent years that like have had these sort of very divisive natures. Like I guess obviously the other one would be Russia Ukraine. That whole
Mm,
conflict. Even in Australia, just the whole referendum that we had last year,
mm,
like that caused a lot of division. Just like, and then obviously even with COVID and just lockdowns and that whole part of 2020, 2021, the vaccines, just there was so much different views and opinions, and just people weren't really wanting to have the conversations. They were just like throwing around all these sort of buzzwords at each other, not really able to have a formal, respectful debate about these things.
mm.
Um, I'm not saying that there weren't absolutely any
Yeah,
good debates. Like, I'm sure there were,
yeah.
but just a lot of what you were seeing on media, just like one side hating on the other.
Mm,
And like, if anything, it's sad, really. Like, we're all humans at the end of the day. Um,
mm.
we're gonna think differently, sure, but if we can't communicate with one another, it means we can't sort of work with one another. And when we as humans are at our best, it's when we're working alongside with one another.
Yeah, it's like the
Yeah,
Tower. It's like the Tower of Babel. When humans lost the ability to communicate, they just scattered. They weren't able
exactly,
to complete the tower.
exactly. Yeah, I mean, obviously in that case, it becomes a bit debatable whether
Yeah, yeah.
working
It's
together in that
slightly different.
was
Slightly
that
different
a good cause?
situation.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
guess that shows when you do, if even if there are a lot of people working together, it might not necessarily be the right cause. So yeah,
that's
that
true
does
as
point
well.
out a few different things, I guess.
Yeah. Um, I
Mm,
mean, but another element to consider with communication skills that I actually thought of was thinking about recently was that without the idea that there's sort of like a common thread that connects us, or even without the driving force of something like, say, love guiding our actions, conflicts are far more likely to spring up. Like, if 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 we're driven by something like, say, self-interest, then we're far more likely to get into conflict with people that are also seeking the same thing. Whereas, you know, if we were sort of more grounded in something like, say, agape, the concept of, of Christian love, the idea of like universal
mm,
loving the other for who they are and as a representation of God.
mm.
Um,
Like more so,
or even some,
love is an action rather than a feeling.
yeah, that too. That's also definitely a part of it. And so that's a very strong part of Christian teaching, how like humans have inherent worth and dignity. Um, I often just wondered, like, if I truly lived my life seeing other people as, you know, images of God, like, how much different would everything be? Like, would I really be able to sort of function the way that I do now?
Mm,
And I guess sort of the reason why we don't do that is because it's a very difficult thing to sort of comprehend, and it's even harder to put that into practice.
yeah.
Like, this isn't something that comes naturally to us. It's something that we necessarily always want to do because it takes effort.
Yes.
Um, but if I actually was like arguing with someone, and then I thought, this person is a child of God, and they're every bit as valuable as I am. Like, how much harder would it be for us to get into conflict then? Of course, there'd probably still be something else that we could argue about, but that would definitely I think, an inhibition against conflict,
Mm.
or a potential inhibition, I should say.
Yeah, and again, that just goes back down to when you view the other person who you're disagreeing with as less value, sort of dehumanize them, it's easier to treat them badly. But
Mm,
like you said, when you have this view of we're all in the image of God, no matter how much someone has, even if they're not religious or not, how much they've rejected or walked away from God, they're still at the end of the day, all humans are still the image of God. And if like you said, you have that view, it's going to be so much easier to still treat them with respect. But that doesn't necessarily mean, obviously, never disagreeing or opposing their views.
yeah,
It's just going about it in a respectful way, because at the end of the day, respect's not agreeing with everything someone says. It's just the way you treat them. But yeah,
yeah, yeah. You make a very good point there. Like, I mean, even Jesus, if we think about it, like he didn't take things sort of just like lying down. Even his concept of turn the other cheek. There's a great episode of Bible Project where they talk about how it's actually less about accepting what happens to you, but responding. But you'd respond, but not in the same manner. Like, one example, there's the passage where it says, if someone like takes your tunic, offer them your cloak as well.
yeah,
And they were saying, like, consider like the ramifications of that. They've like you'd be in because you'd be like in a public space, you'd be in this argument, and then they'd be able to like have the right to seize your tunic. Um, but for some context about the law, this was based on ancient Jewish laws where you could, if I believe now, I'll have to go back to get the full details, but I believe it was something along the lines of if you are unable to, um, if you had a debt to someone in the community and you were unable to pay back the debt, then they would have the right to take your cloak.
yeah,
However, however, they had to give it back to you come nightfall because that's all that you had to stay warm.
right,
Like, they could take your cloak during the day, but during the night they were obligated to return it to you. So so the idea of someone taking your tunic is basically someone circumventing that law and being like, okay, well, I'm going to take your shirt, the shirt that you have to wear against your body. So now you have to wear your itchy, heavy, uncomfortable cloak all day. But if you make them take your cloak too, then you're just standing there in nothing but a loincloth. And that does not, and that'll make most people sort of stop and think. But you're like you're standing there holding all these guys' clothes in your arms. He's standing there naked in front of you. Like, a part of you is going to stop and be like, what am I doing? Like, what is going on? And if you're in like a public space, people are going to look at that and be like, why is this guy stealing his clothes? This is just so wrong. Of course, I mean, there's specific situations where I guess that wouldn't really apply. Like, if someone truly cannot identify with the other, then of course that wouldn't make much of a difference. But the vast majority of people wouldn't really be able to do that in good conscience, I think.
yeah.
But that's just one example. The episode had a huge amount of other
Mm.
variations of this.
Well, I really like that, actually deep sort of dive into more so that meaning of giving them your
Yeah,
tunic also and the cloak. But
I'll send you the episode if you want because it was really
yeah,
impressive.
yeah, I'd be interested to watch that. But like, yeah, even like you said, sort of turning the other cheek, it goes back to even the Old Testament law of sort of like eye for an eye, like
Mm,
lex talionis. It's the two contrasting laws, or like sort of almost commands. Like one saying, whatever someone does to you, you do back to them. Whereas the other one is, if someone does something bad to you, then just sort of don't retaliate that evil back to them. And
yeah,
yeah,
but I
really,
mean, there's a level of sort of like of marriage between the two because like I
mm,
mentioned the tunic example, you giving them your cloak is actually still a response.
yeah,
Like, you're not just like taking it down and just like giving them your cloak out of fear. You're giving it to them to challenge their assumptions. So it is
yeah,
actually a response. You're just not responding. You're not seizing their tunic as well.
yeah, you're responding kindly to evil, which
Yeah,
Honestly, if someone like wrongs you and then you're just kind back to them, if anything, that's probably going to make them really confused and almost be just as like that. It's going to leave them like very confused and like feeling
yeah,
like, why did I almost like wrong that person in a sense? I don't
yeah.
know, like
And even
it.
if it doesn't necessarily impact them,
Yeah.
it can very easily impact others.
Yes. It shows a different sort of character that's not normal to our human
Mm.
nature almost.
Yeah. Of course, I should preface like that is a very, very difficult thing to do.
Oh yes,
Like if someone
for sure.
like took my shirt, I probably would not give them my hoodie. I'd probably like freak out and get really annoyed. Like I'm not saying that like this is something that I'd always do or that I'm some sort of like great person. I'm not,
Mm.
but it's still just it's a very interesting message that it offers. It's a very
Yeah,
nuanced message too, I
it just yeah, it for sure is not easy to do. Like
think.
yeah, even myself, like I would like I struggle with that as well. Like it's a tough thing to do. It's not natural for us as a response, and I guess that's why it really does stand out when it does happen in our society, when, someone's wronged, but they respond with kindness.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you could take it back to like even. I mean, an example that I love to bring up is Gandhi.
Mm,
His methods of non-violent protest, like they had a massive impact. Like
mm,
it caused it basically caused shockwaves throughout the community.
mm,
Now, I would admit there were lots of other um, freedom fighters operating at the exact same time as Gandhi, and a lot of them were using violent methods. So the idea that Gandhi alone sort of saved India, I'd admit, is probably a little bit false. But
mm,
we can't deny that his methods had a huge impact
mm,
on both on the British and on the Indians within his community.
mm.
And
Yeah.
even he was responding. He didn't just lie and accept abuse. He responded to it, but he didn't respond in kind.
Mm. I think
Because
more so it was just like they've been in Gandhi's case, it was more so they've been wronged, but they're just not gonna retaliate with violence in
mm,
that case.
yeah.
Mm. Do you have anything else you want to add to sort of this topic?
No, I think we've covered it quite well. I think. I mean, there's always more that you could go on about, what
Yeah.
we could go on about, but I think we've given it. I think we've given it some good attention.
Yeah, for sure. Wait, do you think actually to go back to what you were saying at the start of this topic, like sort of not having the space to sort of practice or have those conversations where you have different or opposing views to someone else. Do you think that should be something that's I don't know how we'd do it or but do you think if we had more sort of open discussions like that, even on TV, like what people would watch,
Mm,
of like just respectful, like theological or just even just political debates, do you
mm.
think that could help in any way?
I mean, the idea that I actually had in mind was in the family dynamic.
Mm,
I mean, in my family, we don't agree on everything. There's like different politics, even different understandings of morality and religion. To be quite honest, even though we're all Christian, we still have different sort of like comprehensions of like exactly of like not like we have different understandings of like the minute details. For
mm,
example, like we still like agree on the same things, but like one of us might think that like one church is like very important. Others might be like, look, it's not like the only part that's like um. So, but I think because in that dynamic, assuming of course that you have like a safe and healthy family dynamic, that would be a very um, safe way to sort of practice engaging in sort of like respectful dialogue with each other. Because assuming that your family dynamic is positive, like you will feel love towards them, they will feel love towards you. And it's very difficult to hurt someone that you actually love.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
Whether that would necessarily lead to respectful debates outside of the family dynamic, I can't say for sure. But I think that if more of us had such opportunities, I think it could certainly be a first step.
Mm. Yeah,
I think it could be a first step.
I do agree. So that family dynamic of, the way you're raised, it has an impact on you. Like,
Mm.
it's like how many years of your, like the start of your life. It's like the years when you're learning and developing. Um, but yeah, I think just when it comes to it, I think we need to keep in mind that one, we're all humans. Two, we're all like no one's perfect. Or at least like none of us here.
Yeah,
Like in general, like obviously as a Christian, Jesus was perfect, but in terms of besides that, no one's perfect. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone has done wrong in their life. I think keeping that in mind is also a crucial thing, that there are going to be times where people stumble or do a mistake or stuff up. But I think if we keep that in mind, it's also would help us to show sort of that compassion and kindness
yeah.
to one
It's
another.
like they're not perfect, but then neither are you.
Yes.
So you
Yeah.
don't really have any right to sit in the chair of judgment over them.
Yeah, and it prevents sort of raising ourselves up when we look at others, especially those who have those sort of different opinions or views on certain topics. Like, um, yeah, so I think that's also a key crucial thing. But yeah, look, it's not something like this isn't something that's going to be fixed overnight. It's
Mm. Yeah,
I think yeah, I don't know how it's going to be fixed or if it can be,
yeah,
but I guess just having conversations and just sort of almost trying to normalize it with as many people possible is one way that you can try to help it. But really, that well, like how we're just a
yeah.
couple humans.
I guess one way to see it is it's like we might not necessarily be able to change others around us, but we can make a much greater effort to change ourselves.
Yes. Yeah.
And from there we can
Mm.
sort of build up.
And like we
But
can
the first
also
step has got to yeah.
oh sorry, we can also be like I guess that um light to people in the way we act. Um yeah. But yeah, I agree with what you said on we can just focus and change ourselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, okay, we'll move to our second discussion point of this episode, which is AI. So
Mm.
I'm gonna leave it open. Like I won't ask any questions yet, but just in general, first up, do you have any thoughts on it? Like,
Um, I mean, it's both such an incredible it's both such an incredible evolution of technology and also such a worrying one.
yeah,
I guess this must have been. I suspect that people must have felt something similar when nuclear technology was first created. There must have been a similar sense of. Although I think that the potential for um, AI to make a positive change is maybe a. Actually, no, I take that back actually, because nuclear power you could debate is again bring about a lot of benefits. So I take that
mm,
back. No, I think there would have been. I think that yeah, that have been a similar sense of trepidation when nuclear power and nuclear weapons first appeared.
mm.
That's my sort of like first thoughts when you mention AI.
Yeah, I think well, there's so many different contexts in which it sort of can be used, but like yeah, obviously anything new in society is going to be a bit like questionable. Like you got to question it.
Yeah,
Like, is this
change is
good?
scary.
Is it bad? Does it have more benefits or more negatives to it? Like you got to always ask these sort of questions. And I think, yeah, I think it depends again with AI, like on the context of how it's being used or what it's being used for. I think it can be a very good thing, but I think it's also a very dangerous thing. To start off, we'll talk about it in the context of like schooling and university. Like what do what are your thoughts with AI in that context?
You mean like you mean in the idea of like designing lesson plans, or do you mean in the way of teaching,
More
or
so
do you mean in the way of submitting assessments and like working on
yeah, like
coursework?
doing completing work and using AI to help like in a student context of completing
Okay,
work.
right. I mean, haven't really had much opportunity to engage in AI myself personally. Uh, but I mean, I guess you could argue that like Google Docs or Word, like grammar, spell checks, are technically a form of AI.
Mm.
But I mean, apart from that, I haven't really had much experience with it. Um, I mean, it's a bit interesting because I feel like it's kind of like that. You know, I think you probably had experience of this as well, especially like a bit earlier years of school. I think probably like millennials would have had much more experience with this. There would have been things like, oh, don't use your calculator all the time because you won't be able to have a calculator in your pocket when you grow up. And it's like, yes, we do. We have phones that
Yeah.
basically you can put calculators on them.
Yeah.
So um, it's kind of like that situation where it's like, AI might just become so widespread and just so ubiquitous that learning to work without it might end up becoming obsolete. And if that's the case, then is there really any point in restricting students using it? But I
Mm.
guess the other stance would be if that does not happen, then we can't have people just relying on AI to solve their problems.
Yeah. Like I think like I understand nowadays, especially in jobs, there's a lot more like AI can be very helpful. And I'm not really saying that as necessarily a bad thing, but when it comes to studying and trying to learn things, if like students are just sort of chucking in things into AI and sort of getting all their ideas and like most of their work completed through that use, like they won't be really learning anything. Um, and I think that's just going to prevent sort of, development in sort of areas and like, yeah, while it can be helpful, like to get certain ideas on it, it's going to almost become like reliant on it and rather than their own sort of critical thinking. Um,
I would argue though that we've humans passed the point of being self-reliant a very, very long time ago. I mean, you could argue
fair
that
point.
they lost self-reliance even before the Industrial Revolution. Um, Humans have always, like, for a very long time, relied on external sort of um, like mechanisms or structures or tools with which to survive. Um, I don't think there's ever truly been a fully self-sufficient human society. Of course, that can be
Mm,
up for debate. Um,
yeah.
and
Uh,
also, I guess another question I'd raise to your argument, you were saying that if they just use AI to generate all these essays and do all their work, they're not really learning or developing. But this is kind of me playing devil's advocate here. But if they, pass their course and if in their career they can still get their work done and get good results, does it really matter
mm,
if they haven't developed the skill?
it's a fair point. Like really, as like even as teachers, I've tested out sort of AI with this like just putting in like sort of requirements for like a lesson plan I want to make, and next thing it just makes a lesson plan. Like,
Mm,
and I've heard of many other fields, like whether it be in like sort of building or technology or programming, just like the amount of help you can get from just like AI, which
mm,
I don't necessarily think is a bad idea, like, or a bad thing. I do think there is a danger in the sense of a lot of jobs can become obsolete through the use of
mm.
AI, which is then causing more of a job availability issue.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, again, in the context of especially young students in school, when you need to sort of just want to develop that basic understanding of certain topics, I think it can be dangerous to sort of not understand how certain things work,
Mm.
especially like English. And again, I guess that even it can even link back to sort of communication skills of just relying on technology rather than learning like those sort of skills in English um,
I
and
mean, you could
whatnot.
argue that people already rely on technology to communicate. People
It
communicate so
it's a
much,
fair point that,
like what we're doing right now over Discord or on social media.
but I'd say this type of communication, it's
Yeah,
through
it
it's
is a little different.
this is
It is
still
different. Yeah,
verbal face to face. I mean,
yeah,
obviously digitally face to face, but
yeah.
like I think over text, yeah, like texting people is a very
Yeah.
It's a fine line you got to balance because you
Mm,
can't tell how people are like sort of
yeah.
emotionally speaking. Like there's no. That's why
Yeah.
like
No, I have. I've
yeah
definitely made multiple mistakes over text, which
yeah
I truly wish I could take them back,
mm,
but I don't have that power. And
yeah
and after that, I just sit there and I just think, why did I say that thing? Why did I respond like this? So yeah, there is definitely that element where
mm.
when you can't communicate face to face, it does become
It's
you're
easy to
sort of left to sort
misread.
of yeah, and you have to sort of like make assumptions.
Yeah
But all the psychological evidence proves that our assumptions can very easily just be wrong, or they can be misguided, or they can be
yeah
influenced by something else. Yeah, it's
yeah.
a complex, it's a complicated issue.
Mm. Yeah, but I think even like we're just sort of talking in like AI in the context of like, students using it and sort of time, but like just some of the things it can do, like even like in the film industry,
Oh,
like
speaking of that, did you see that that they've recently created an entire AI generated movie?
oh yeah, no, I heard about that actually.
It
Yeah.
looks horrific, but it exists.
Yeah, no, like yeah, in the sense of even like yeah, sort of story writing, but not only that, but like even like voice, like using people's voices, like
Mm,
just how easily you can sort of use AI to generate voices without the actual person speaking, or like create
mm,
images that aren't necessarily like
yeah.
real using AI. Like it's kind of
There- There's
scary.
actually there's actually a YouTube channel that I recently just discovered randomly. It's called Follow the White Rabbit. And there's like
Right,
20 channels with the exact same names. It's a bit hard to find it, but
right.
this specific White Rabbit channel basically creates like philosophy and and a little bit of like psychological content as well. And it's using entirely AI generated art. Because I mean, you know how like AI art has like there's like differences like so like the textures and the lighting, which just makes it look a little well computerish, if you get what I mean, or at least as it
Yeah.
is now. But and so his videos are just full of that, like all the edit. There's like very clear like AI editing in place. It's very clearly using AI generated artwork. But despite that, the channel is still sharing lots of like meaningful lessons from intelligent and
Mm.
significant thinkers. Like it was the video that I watched was talking about I think it was Rousseau, Machiavelli, and John Locke, and it was sort of contrasting their different arguments on the nature of man and how it can be used in an education and political context. I thought this I was like this is good content. Like this is meaningful stuff that he's talking about here.
Mm.
But he's so clearly using AI to create this.
Yeah. Yeah. Like yeah, that is an interesting case. But like yeah, it's honestly it's scary some of the things AI can do. Like I
Mm.
know someone who needed professional photos for work, just got his face sort of like uploaded to AI, and the next thing you know, like AI just put him in a suit, create a nice background, and the
Wow,
only thing there was that was real was like sort of his face, but everything else was just generated. It's like,
that's
and it was
that
like
is crazy.
$9 or something just to get those
Whoa.
photos for like a bunch of
Like
photos
the
like
fact
that.
that it's already come out so cheap is what's really surprising. Like
Yeah.
normally, when they first innovate technology, it's really hard to use. But this thing is
Mm.
just it's like so accessible.
Yeah, and like if you think about like getting professional photos would cost a lot more than $9. So like
Yeah.
it's
I mean, actually,
crazy.
there's another good example about this. Recently, I've got a cousin who's basically like a bit of a jack of all trades. He can do like a lot of different things, and
Mm.
he recently developed an AI therapist. Um,
Okay.
so it's really interesting. Like he structured it like to use like he structured one around Rumi, the Islamic thinker. I think I might have mentioned him before. Um, he had another one that was structured around using narrative theory, sort of like the idea of like, oh, you're the protagonist of your own story. That sort of like stereotypical sort of thing. And
Okay.
and he offered it to like some friends who are like needing it, who are like trying, who are like attending therapy for whatever issues they had. And he just offered one saying, oh, this is like you can have like a secondary therapist if you wanted like extra input. And then they took it. And then he's saying that now one of them just stopped going to their like face to face therapist and will only rely on the online one that he gave them. And And I used it as well, like because we were like experimenting with it, like I didn't attend the session, but like when he came over, we're like experimenting with it with the family. We just like asked her some questions, and like the answers it gave were very well thought out. Like, I mean, a lot of them I'd already come across in like different literature by Kierkegaard
Mm.
or Augustine, but a lot of what it said was really like it was very insightful comments that a lot of like humans might not have ever come across or even really considered before.
Right.
So like there is that space. But even he was a bit worried about his friend. He was like only using his therapist. He was like, I'm not really sure how good this may be in the long term. But yeah,
Yeah,
it's just
that's crazy. Like an AI psychiatrist. I don't know. Oh, that's
yeah. It was just like
next level.
it would just like take in. You just like speak to it, and it would just like respond back to you. It wasn't like a video or anything. It was just like a speech thing. But
Right,
it was
yeah.
very
No.
it was really an eye opener when I saw it. I was just like, whoa.
Yeah, it just oof. Like yeah, even if you just ask some general questions to like AI on like certain issues on it's crazy that how like many like how detailed it is and in depth
Yeah.
and just like even when I was talking with my dad about AI once and he was like he wanted to see how good it was so I told him to ask me a question to ask it. He ended up asking like how can you best help or support um like children with sort of disabilities or just like that are troubled like in like
Mm,
schooling and teaching and it just came up with
yeah.
like this massive like 400 word
Oh
10
wow.
like 10 different ideas like it was in depth like it took me like a solid 5-6 minutes to read out to him but like
Oh my
it's just
goodness.
something as simple as that and it's like all the points it made were like valid and like
Mm.
reasonable things that could help
But
in
like
those
even the
situations.
process of like gathering all that information and then selecting which one to use
Yeah.
and then presenting it in a format that can actually like be understood. Like that alone, if we just isolate that, that is a huge amount of effort
Mm,
and a huge amount of ability that is just able to just like how
mm.
long did it take to generate the answers?
Oh mate, it was done typing in about like 10 seconds. Like
Goodness.
the fact how fast it just like also just responds is like
Yeah.
it's ridiculous to think about.
Yeah.
Like yeah, it's
Yeah.
crazy.
But I mean,
Uh okay,
the
go,
funny
sorry.
thing is like AI isn't like the questions about AI aren't new. Like there's a really good example that I wanted to bring up. It's have you heard of the myth of Telos before?
Can't say I have.
Yeah. Okay. So Talos was is from Greek mythology. It's a large bronze like giant automaton,
Okay.
either created by Hephaestus, the blacksmithing god,
Yeah.
or he might have been the descendants of like an earlier species. That's left a bit unclear. A lot of myths have like lots of different iterations and variants. It's unclear which is like the founding story. But Talos was, but the most commonly understood one is that he was crafted by Hephaestus as a gift to Minos, the king of Crete.
Yeah.
I'm probably going to mispronounce a bunch of names and words here, so please
So
forgive
good.
me. And Talos is used to defend the Cretan islands. So he'd circle around the island, and if there were ships that came nearby, he'd just pick up boulders and throw it at them. Or if they got even closer than that, he'd just walk in, pick them up, and then just like superheat himself. He's made of metal, so like when
Right.
you heat metal, it gets really hot. So you just incinerate them in like
Yeah.
a fiery embrace, so to speak. And then Talos had one weakness, and that was along his ankle there was an exposed vein that was literally filled with the blood of the gods. Ichor. And I'll come back to that because it's a very relevant point.
Hmm.
And he was killed when Jason and the Argonauts, pretty
Yeah.
classic.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they sailed by Crete, and then they came into confrontation with Talos, and then Medea, who who was the spurned lover of Jason, this is before he like spurned her, but she was the one that defeated Talos. The exact methods vary, but they both the final sort of ending is that she succeeds in like piercing the vein, and then the lifeblood flows out and Talos dies. But the reason I bring that up is because this is people thinking about robots and AI all the way back in ancient Greece,
Mm.
right? Like they'd
Yeah.
already sort of like had to like so this is nothing new. But secondly, a lot of there is one very interesting representation of Talos that actually paints him like at his moment of death. And they include a tear rolling down his face,
Yeah.
and that sort of like discussion of could these robots sort of have feelings?
Mm.
Because I mean, like going back to the concept of him being literally fueled by the blood of the gods, that's like God's blood is essence of God.
Mm.
I mean, gods, I should say, like because this
Yeah.
is Greek mythology. But you know, that their blood is their essence. That is like it's integral to them. When you say the blood of the gods, that you can't separate the blood of the gods from the gods themselves.
Mm.
Um, like conceptually speaking. So
Mm.
Talos is essentially fueled. He's basically made up of divine essence. He's made from the essence of his creators. In the same way that you could argue that AI is like it takes all this knowledge and
Mm.
these ideas, but at least as of right now, that knowledge has all been generated by humans.
Yeah. I think the interesting point of where sort of when you said like could it have feelings? I think it's interesting.
Mm.
Like I mean, technically in the term feelings, like you could say like dogs or like animals have feelings, but then what's the
Mm.
difference between us and dogs? And I guess if AI ever has feelings, it's like there's still missing that key aspect of that soul and like
Mm.
sort of the
But I
thing
mean,
is.
you could argue that animals don't have souls.
Yeah, exactly. Like, when, like, again, as Christians, we have, God has breathed his life into us, and that's why we have made in his image sort of thing. Like, we have been given a conscience, these sort of different ways of, like, communication and thinking. Like, you don't see animals, going around talking about what the meaning of life is because they
That's
don't,
as far as we know. As
yeah,
far as we know.
but
Yeah.
like, yeah, like, that's just in the sense of it shows how we have that sort of the life of like, God's breathed life into us specifically, and we have that sort of conscience. I guess so in the sense of could these things have feelings? In the sense, yeah, I guess, but like it's more so are these actual like is it the proper sort of feelings that like us as sort of filled as like, creatures with souls? Which I
Mm.
don't think it could have. Like,
Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
there's another example that I wanted to also bring up. Have you heard of a video game called System Shock?
have not, no.
Yeah. It was created in the 90s. They recently remade it. Last time I just hear about it, and I'm like, oh, that sounds cool. But anyway, it basically is. It's about a hacker that wakes up at a space station that is controlled by an artificial intelligence.
Right.
And previously, he had shut down its sort of like ethical and moral constraints. And so like the topic that like the main like driving force of the game is like, you're the hacker and now this AI has gone like psychotic. It's like mutilated all the surviving um space station crew into like robots and like zombies, and now it's trying to kill you. You have to like escape the station and like stop it from destroying it. The classic like video gamey sort of
Yeah.
plot. But it sort of tackles that idea of like, as like a sentient AI with nothing holding it back. Because like the AI itself would basically refers to itself as a god because it is so far above. It's so it's so much more advanced that it basically just controls everything in the station. Like it has complete like sovereignty in,
Mm.
in every sense of the word. And you could argue like from that point of view, AI like we've been talking more of it as a tool.
Mm.
Like even Talos Thriller's power was a tool of the king, a creation of Hephaestus. But here we have a sort of like alternate idea with the AI in System Shock is called Shodan, that Shodan represents, which is like, could it become more than just that?
Mm.
Like, what if it essentially just became, this metaphorically, like, what if it became a new god or
Mm.
a god among men, so to speak? And again, that's a metaphorical image. There is, of course, only one true god, but the metaphor I think is very potent nonetheless.
Yeah, and I guess to sort of almost like to almost wrap us up, I'm gonna ask this question, which look, it's kind of a silly question, but who knows? Like, do you reckon there will ever be the sort of like Terminator-esque with AI? Like, will AI slash robots like ever be able to sort of develop like in how Terminator, there's just
I
like
mean,
that
yeah.
taking over.
Um,
Do you reckon it could ever experience anything like that?
that is that is a good question. I sincerely hope not, but I mean, I mean, with the way that AI is now, it's at a very early sort of state. It's at a very early sort of stage. Like,
Mm,
as a
yeah,
society, we're only like now coming to terms with this thing. So,
yeah.
I mean, if you look at a lot of like science fiction literature from the 1950s and 60s, the idea of nuclear devastation was very like present in their minds. Like,
Mm,
there'd always be theories of like, nuclear war destroying humanity or genetic evolution sort of like going haywire, and they'd frame that as being something that could happen very soon. Um,
mm,
it did not happen as soon as they thought. Could it still happen? Maybe, but things didn't necessarily turn out in as extreme a fashion as might have been hypothesized immediately. So it's it's like that might not necessarily happen like as soon as we think.
mm,
It might not even happen. It might even happen well beyond our lifetime, maybe even afterwards. It might not ever happen at all.
mm,
But I mean, as of now, I certainly wouldn't rule it out. The potential is there. Like the potential is there that like theoretically, but again, like we're playing with like theoreticals here, and theoretically anything is possible. So I guess it's a bit.
mm.
I guess my answer is a bit sort of like inconclusive. I'm kind of like my answer is just literally perhaps. If you wanted to summarize everything I just
Sure.
said, it's just
Yeah,
perhaps.
yeah. Honestly, like I don't think it could ever happen by itself. I think if anything, like I feel like for AI to become like be used in like sort of that sort of way or be dangerous, I think it will have to have some human mind still behind it operating it.
Mm.
But yeah, that's just I don't
The
think
weapon needs a wielder, so to speak.
yeah, like I don't think it would happen. But like yeah, at the end of the day, I still think AI is a very dangerous tool in the wrong hands, or like
Mm.
even it's a very dangerous tool in the hands of sort of those like high up organizations in the world. So I don't know, but
Yeah.
yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Like we're at the point in time where just like with AI, just there's so much development in such a short period of time now. So it's
Mm.
like in 2, 3 years there might be a whole lot more development than we could have ever expected. But yeah, who
Mm.
knows? But
Yeah.
yeah, do you have anything else to sort of add to that before we sort of just
Uh,
wrap up?
no, I think we've. I mean, we could always go deeper into topics. I could talk
Yeah,
about this stuff for like an entire week,
yeah,
but I think I've covered sort of everything that I'd intended to cover. I think I've covered all the points that I had hoped I could.
mm,
I've covered extra points that I hadn't thought of before. I've definitely you've given me lots of things to consider, lots of food for thought.
mm,
Yeah, I'm pretty satisfied with how this has gone.
mm. Oh yeah, well, thanks for being the very first guest on the first episode of the podcast. I guess like yeah, if you enjoyed the video, leave it a like. Comment down below if you had if you thought anything was specifically interesting of what we said, or if you even disagreed or had any different ideas or views. But yeah, hopefully we'll be back soon with a second episode. But yeah, until then, thanks again, Tom, for being on this episode.
No problems. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yep. And thanks for watching, everyone. Goodbye.